I'm Joel Saxum with Cyclone Surveys. I was asked to come and show, and we actually enjoy showing. I go to quite a few conferences, GIS conferences. I was at a solid waste management one the other day, and kind of try and showcase the UAS, UAV drone, whichever you want to call it. We prefer to call it UAS, unmanned aerial systems, or UAV, unmanned aerial vehicles. Kind of try and showcase it and the new technology that's available now, and show that it's just not a gimmick. It's just not something like you can go and take some beautiful pictures of the fall colors or the front of the Heartwood Conference Center that looks amazing in the sunlight. It's not just videos and pictures and grab a video of your buddy wakeboarding or something like that. There's actually data derivatives and a real world use for it in the GIS, the surveying, engineering, and architectural worlds. So going forward, like I said, who I am, why I'm here. Why I'm here is to try and open people's eyes to the fact that UAS, UAV drone technology is on the forefront. It's leading. It's going to be here. We are just trying to figure out as many ways as we can use it and utilizing it in different industries. So why I'm here is to show you guys that in the past it's been seen as like, oh, that's kind of neat. These are really cool. At trade shows, they see a drone, or anybody sees a drone and say, oh, fantastic, it looks cool, but what can it do? Well, it can take imagery, but we can get data out of it. Who I am, like I said, I'm Joel Saxum. I'm the Vice President of Cyclone Surveys, Inc. We operate in Minnesota, Wisconsin mainly, and then our other industries, we operate across North America from Alaska to the Gulf of Mexico, into Mexico, Pennsylvania to California, the Rockies, everywhere in between. A couple of things I want to go over, the difference in the FAA regulations from when there was the Section 333, and I'll kind of go over that for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Section 333, switching over into the Part 107 that just happened this summer. The FAA's attempt and realization that there needs to be laws and rules governing the use of drones, because they realize, like we do, they have a purpose, they're here to stay, they're going to be used commercially. A couple other things that we're going to go over very briefly. Different uses for public and private sector. This is one of the subjects that I like to touch on with everybody as far as what can it do for you. You guys are the GIS, Wisconsin Land Information Association, right? GIS Maine. It's known that a drone like the one we're going to do a demo on today, our big fixed wing drone, can be in the air for 45, 50 minutes. You think that it can't cover that much ground, with very much accuracy for aerial imagery and stuff like that flying counties for aerials and stuff, it can't do, which is false in our case. We're actually working on a job right now down in Texas that's over 300 square miles, and we're flying the whole thing with drones. Now, that takes a lot of man work, a lot of computing power, and the other things. But, so we'll go over some of the public and private sector uses. Some of the different UAS systems that are out there. You've seen the little drones that Buddy can buy and fly around the neighborhood and spy in his neighbor's backyard if you want, or whatever. Also in the news in the last 10 years has been the military drones. Big fixed-wing aircraft that can stay in the air for days at a time. So it goes from that spectrum down to, I know one of our manufacturers that we use, DJI, just came out with a new little drone that is the size of a 20-ounce pop bottle, and the wings fold out of it. So you can stick it in your backpack, pop it out, grab your iPhone, and fly it around. So the different systems, the different uses, why you would use a certain system some way, why you'd use it in a different case, different scenarios there. Another thing as well is the UAS data deliverable review, and that's my big focus. And computer's not acting quite right now, but we'll see what we can pull out of it. The idea and the knowledge that UAS, UAV drones don't just give beautiful imagery. I mean, even the little ones have 4K cameras and stuff, I'm right. But out of that imagery and from the data that you can get on it in different sensors, the idea that there is usable data there. There is data that you can design off of. There's a whole gamut of possibilities with drones, and it's only going to get better going forward. So the uses we have right now are going to be exponential as they go on. One of the biggest things that I like to preach, and I'd like anybody involved in UAS, UAV drone usage, or anybody even around them, and for the general public to realize is the safety that is important with them. As far as the FAA is concerned, a drone, it falls under the same regulations as a manned aircraft, besides some of the operational stuff. But as far as airspace laws, the repercussions you can have of fighting or messing with someone else's, a third party's drone, in the news, shooting one down. What the repercussions of that are, why you need to realize, and I know operating and being around them as a certain part of the public, that they have to be handled safely. The other thing, some of the simple stuff, right? Battery power, propellers, like they're very dangerous. There was just, I don't know if any of you guys follow baseball, but there was just a pitcher pitching for, I believe it was the Indians, that cut himself with a drone. He had to get 12 stitches the day before he went to go pitch, and they pulled him out of the game. So, as a real world relation. So moving forward, my background is legal surveying and engineering. That's the world I came from. I worked for a couple companies in Chicago, out in Maryland, one in Minneapolis. So having the background of a legal surveyor, I realized the importance of accuracy. It's something that kind of falls in deaf ears on other industries that don't realize it. So that's one thing that we've brought in our research, in our processing, and our deliverables of our drone work is ground control, the importance of it, and delivering that to clients. So that's part of my background, part of my future. We're going to see where the drone world can take us. I think it's a big wave to ride on. I think it's only going to get more important and come more to the forefront as more people realize what it is. Reasons why we, as in we, I mean Cyclone Services, our company, adopted UAS. Part of our background is we worked in the oil and gas industry. In the oil and gas industry, the same thing I preached in the last slide, safety is paramount. The biggest thing in the safety world is exposure hours. Now, there's ways to control everything, but exposure hours is something that you have to have. If you're going to go, say you're doing a large-scale GIS project, instead of putting a dozen people out in John Deere Gators with Geo 6000 Trimble units, driving in inclement conditions on rutty trails, collecting data, walking the streets, collecting data with traffic flowing, things like that. Those are exposure hours that you can't get back with traditional methods. You have to collect the data that way. And so in the oil field, I was saying, like, we're working on this project as 300 square miles. In the past, you had to have an army of people out there driving around all day, spending fuel, being exposed to the elements, being exposed to crashing a gator, being exposed to tearing up a knee, anything like that comes with field work. If any of you probably been involved in field work, trucking through a swamp or dealing with things like that, it's not that fun. What the UAS offers us, and an advantage over some of our competitors, is we don't have to put those boots on the ground. What used to take us a crew of 6, 8, 10 guys to map out 20, 30 square miles, and extrapolate that, now takes us 2 guys, one visual observer to watch the drone, one guy to go set some control points, and another guy to fly it from a distance. The data derivatives we get out of it, like I was saying, is they're all-encompassing, they're more accurate, and it's efficient. The data that you can derive out of them while taking those boots off the ground, you don't miss anything. And that's one of the big reasons for the adoption of UAS into our industry. And we've taken it to work with some mines in northern Minnesota, some frac sand mines in Wisconsin here, a couple of big subdivision projects. We're working with a couple engineering firms that are redoing some lakes, different things where it would take a traditional survey crew weeks to survey these. Our data is more accurate, or the data UAS can derive is more accurate, safer and efficient. You don't have to put the people in the swamps. You don't have to stop your machinery from working. We can just do it passively. You don't have the danger of putting those people out there. So why I'm here, of course, spreading the word that this is a legitimate technology, that it's here to stay. It's only getting better. Since we deal a lot in UAS with our company, it's constant. It's every couple days, someone in the office finds a new system that's out there, like, hey, what do you think of this one? Hey, what do you think of this one? coming from the reason we got into our fixed wing that we use, the UX5, it's a Trimble product, was used overseas quite extensively. Africa, Europe, South America, before it got to the United States. We saw that wave coming and figured we'd hop on it and learn as much as we could about it, the processing, the data derivatives, what we can do with it. And I'm here to try and show you guys that it is a viable technology, and it will be here in the future. So some things on the FAA regulations. It used to be, a couple years ago, the FAA saw, the first one was, any of you guys know the story about Lake Made Beer? With the drones? Lake Made Beer was the first company to commercially get their hand slapped by the FAA. Lake Made Beer was delivering 12 packs of beer to ice fishermen. They called in, they said, hey, here's our coordinates, we're here, can you guys bring us some beer? And someone said, hey, this will be really cool, let's try and fly it out there with a drone. So they got a drone, I do not remember what it was, but they flew a 12-pack across the lake and dropped it to some ice fishermen. So then, word kind of spread, it actually made the news in Minneapolis, and then the FAA got a hold of it and said, hey, this is a problem because now it's a commercial aircraft, and we have to regulate this. We have to figure out, like, what are we going to do about this? Because otherwise we're just going to have drones flying everywhere, delivering stuff. And that was when, at the same time, Amazon and FedEx and UPS all started kind of seeing, hey, this is something that we can do. It's the same concept. You're cutting down on manpower. So the FAA got a hold of them, and they said, hey, they didn't really have the regulations in place, but said, you guys need to stop. You guys have to stop. We're going to figure something out here. So they put this the Section 333 in place. Section 333 was you have to apply to it to the FAA, and then you go into a lengthy review process. They want to know what brands you fly, or what drones you're flying, what UAS you're flying, why you're flying them, the safety protocol that you have in place, the capabilities of it. They want to know that you're only going to fly in certain airspace. They want to know that you're going to fly at 400 feet or less. They had all kinds of rules and regulations to it. We applied for one a couple years back, and it ended up taking us, we had to get the aid of a law firm, and it took us 9 months to get this Section 333 exemption. We were one of the first ones in the Midwest to get it. Started flying with it. It ended up being, even though they had the 333 exemption in place, now you had to get COAs, Certificate of Authorizations, to fly in certain airspaces, just to fly anywhere. There was all kinds of other regulations on top of it where it made it honestly not a viable business option. You couldn't, unless you were flying one area, one spot, say if you were a mine and you wanted to fly your own stuff, it made it not viable. And what ended up happening is companies just said, well, a lot of them were mines. We're just going to fly it. We're just going to do it and see what happens. And nobody got in trouble. The FAA doesn't have the manpower or the actual legal power at the time to really chase people down and catch them for violations. Now there was a few random ones that happened in, like, someone was flying in downtown New York. They ended up getting hit with a $1.9 million fine. But they were flying in between, they were by LaGuardia, that's where they actually caught them. And they were flying in between buildings, and they had a bunch of videos up online, and they ended up getting in a lot of trouble. Very, very small percentage of commercial operations actually had anything happen. And under the Section 333, you had to have a licensed, minimum would be a sport pilot. So you had to go through, to be able to fly them commercially, you had to go through private pilot training. Some of it, if you guys are familiar with it, it's advertised as, hey, we can do it for $5,000. In reality, it'll take $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 just to get that license. So you had to have a licensed pilot. And it couldn't be, you couldn't have one on staff, you actually had to have one out flying it. So again, it made it not a really commercially viable option to fly drones. They started the Know Before You Fly app. That was an FAA rollout that said, hey, let's try this. You say, I'm flying here, this is my drone, here's my information, I'm at these coordinates, I'm going to stay within 200 feet of me. And then you put it into the Know Before You Fly app that was on the Android, iOS, and all that good jazz. And they pull up and say, you can't fly here, or you can fly here, you're in this airspace. Now they've come with new renditions of that program. What, what they ended up realizing is that, hey, this Section 333 thing really isn't gonna work either. So let's give ourselves, they gave ourselves a deadline, and the deadline was like last December, and it ended up coming out this August, as government, right? Of this Part 107. So FAA Part 107 regulations, they loosened the regulations a lot. They went down to, you could be a pilot, or you could take an UAS certification course online, get some review materials and take a test and pass it, and then you could fly them. Now you still have to, there's still an immense amount of regulation you have to follow, but that rolled out on August 19th, and it made it easier and more viable to fly drones for commercial aspects. Now, commercial aspects are, even if the Heartwood Conference Center wanted to fly this place and put a video up online that says, hey, come visit the Heartwood Conference Center. If they didn't have a certified pilot do that, that would technically be illegal, because they're doing it for commercial purposes. Even though they're not collecting money for someone, they're advertising with it. So that SUAS, Blake here is one of our pilots for cyclone surveys. I think it took you about a month to study and take the test. So it's not out of reach. It's something that definitely can be done. We had a pilot on staff, so he was able to kind of do this, and you'll have the information. A lot of it's airspace law. But it's viable now to be able to do that now. The other thing they put in place after the know before you fly Act is it's called a DROTA. The classical senses, if you guys know anything about any of our pilots, a NOTAM, notice to airmen, like I'm going to be operating in this area. They go on, what the FAA did was they created a thing called a DROTA. And a DROTAM is the same thing as a notice to other airmen in operating area, but it's for drones. So you go online and you file it and say, we're going to be operating a drone here, and that did away with some of the certificate of authorizations from the FAA Section 333. So you're able to more easily use them now with this Part 107. And if any of you guys have any questions about Part 107, whatever, you can get my contact information and I can forward them on to my pilot if I haven't answered them, or if I don't know an answer for them. He's a student of the game and lives for it now. Going forward in the future, they've developed on October 30th is passed now, but they've developed a website portal on the FAA website where you can put in your coordinates, the height you want to fly, and the radius of where you're going to be flying from, and it will notify air traffic control in the areas that you're near. And they'll say, yes, you can, or no, you can't. If you get permission, it sends you an email basically giving you permission, and it sends the air traffic control that's nearby an email that says, there is a small UAS operating in this area at these coordinates, so they know as well. At one point in time, they said they want people to contact air traffic control. Now they're saying don't do that. Let's keep it kind of hands off. So October 3rd, that goes into effect for Class E airspace. October 31st, it goes into effect for Class C and D airspace. Class E airspace is your tiny little like Hayward Airport. Class C and D, I believe, like Duluth International is a C. And then Class B, which is they're trying to roll something up like this, but it'll be a little bit different, is December 1st. Class B airspace is Minneapolis, big airports like that, Milwaukee, such and such. So what the FAA has done is they've made it a bit easier to operate commercially, but there's still regulations that you need to follow to make sure that everybody else operating in the area, manned aircraft or not, knows you're there. Anybody have any questions about the FAA stuff? Quick click. If you have anything else and you don't want to ask, you can grab me later too. So now that it's a little bit easier to fly UAS in different areas, the couple of things that we've been using it for in the private sector. So in the private sector, of course, this innovation came to us in the oil field. And what we do with it there is large-scale GIS mapping. We get contracted by people to map the surface before they do oil exploration, and also for inventory and maintenance. So we map existing pipelines, pipeline right-of-ways before they go in. We map large-scale areas where they do seismic exploration to see where it's safe to travel, where it's not. We can, with the data that we get from our drones, we can pick out fences, we can pick out pipelines, we can pick out buried pipelines sometimes, gates, how many wellheads are where, the exact location of spills. The oil field loves it because you're hands off. You don't have to go into sites. You can inspect something from afar. You know, we can send a fixed or a rotorcraft drone in there with a camera on it to look at something that might be damaged before you actually put people in there. There's even been cases that I've heard of where instead of doing confined space, they put drones into confined spaces in tanks and stuff, which I wouldn't recommend, but they've done it. The other things that that we as a company have been working with is a lot of landfills, solid waste management. Landfills are controlled by, you know, in Minnesota it's the MNPCA. I'm not sure what it is in Wisconsin, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. They have a lot of regulations as far as volumetrics, how much volume you can have in a certain landfill site, what kind of items you can have in that landfill site, how much cover you need to put on top of it, the slopes on the side of it, and what they must be if it rains. They don't want water sloping off. So in that same breath is the mining industry, these frac sand mines. Doing the volumetrics for it. The volumetrics for the drone is very easy. It's something that I should, instead of shutting a mine down and having a survey crew crawl all over that pile of sand, you can fly it and not have to do anything and get the same data actually more accurate because you have points all the time. Points all over. Instead of having a survey point across the top and survey on the bottom, you have every 2 inches on it, you have a data point. The same thing in the construction, earthwork, and heavy highway. Seeing how much concrete they pulled out, how much they put in. Map, you can get vector-derived data from it. The uses that for the construction, we work with Kraus Anderson quite a bit down in Minneapolis, flying drones for a lot of their projects, and they keep coming up with new stuff. Can you check this? We're checking construction layout with them now. They're laying out buildings, and we're going and flying them and then returning data that says, yes, your layout is good before you pour all your concrete. So the uses go on. That's the same thing, design, engineer, architecture. If you could go, if you're going to build a school, a subdivision, and you want to know exactly what your elevation model is before you start designing off of it, instead of sending a survey crew out there to take a couple points here and there, the data that you get from the drones, you can get, on this table, we'll have 100 data points instead of 5 data points throughout this room if you had a traditional survey crew out there. Another thing we do with the drones is in agriculture, RGB, standard imagery, regular imagery. You can check vigor of plants, stuff like that. But then you can move over to the NDVI cameras in a UAS, which is the normalized difference vegetation index. So the first job that we actually did was actually up in Napa Valley. We flew a couple of liners. And we could grab those cameras and deliver the data that. A big thing for the public sector, we're working on a contract right now down just outside of Mexico City, where they have there's a lot of oil fields there that are being sold off. They're sold off. They changed hands so many times. Nobody knows what's actually out there. So doing the maintenance and inventory of large sites. We're going out to 20 square mile little oil field patches and giving them imagery that has 2-inch resolution or inch resolution on it, so they can do the inventory of what they have out there. So of course, imagery is always a very good deliverable. Public sector, I know with the flooding and the stuff that we had go on up here in northern Wisconsin this summer, floodplain mapping is a big one. We did a floodplain project down in Louisiana last year, right by a dike where a dike broke, and we were able to give them elevation models to do all their hydraulic planning and hydrology studies. So floodplain mapping of a creek bed or something going through a town, or a creek drainage, be another public sector use. Large scale GIS, again, not having to have a 20-man GIS survey crew out running around in the streets, or running around highways, we were working with the National Forestry to do some work out in Wyoming they had an immense system of trails on a mountain, and instead of putting people out there on foot because you couldn't drive any gas-powered vehicles out there on foot or horseback to map it. We were going to fly it and get all the data that way. So like I said, that we continually have companies coming to us, what can you do, what can you do? Or we have this problem, how can you solve it? And the only thing we've ran into so far that we can't solve is airspace regulations if we can't get in there to fly. And as it sits right now, there's nothing that can shoot through foliage. So that's where we sit there. Anybody have any questions about different uses for them? And then I'll get into some of the data stuff here in a second, so you can see actually these are the uses for it, but this is the data we're getting for it. So data deliverables. Traditional imagery, you look at Google Earth, you look at some of the stuff that's been flown around here. I know I'm actually from Hayward. So in 2010, I think we had an 18-inch resolution imagery project in Sawyer County. Great imagery. Looking at that as opposed to the old stuff, the one meter, the NAIP project stuff, that's just not quite as accurate. Going to this imagery it's simply amazing the things you can pull out of it. We're mapping that job down in Texas right now, and people are pulling out the top of wellheads and fence posts, things that are just amazingly small that you could never pull out in traditional imagery. Painting control points on the ground now goes from an aerial target, on a section corner that's 6 feet by 6 feet, to when we put our control out for these, it's in a spot that big, and there'll be 40 pixels across it, so it's easy to pick. So the accuracy of the imagery, and I'll show you a couple of examples here, is pretty amazing. The stuff that we have that's less than an inch usually is when we do with rotorcraft and we do small projects, right? If you're flying this resort, or you're flying, we did some compost sites down in Minnesota, and we were down inch resolution. The stuff I'm going to show you here is a project we did with our UX5, the one we're going to go fly, to see the imagery off of that. So large areas and small areas, you can stitch them together. I think earlier there was a speaker that was stitching parcels. You can do the same thing with imagery, where we fly large projects, and in our processing, different suites of processing software, you can stitch them together and you develop orthomosaics that aren't just one flight. You can do it immensely over large areas. The big derivative that everything is based off of is the point clouds that you get. So if any of you guys are familiar with classical stereography, I know when I first went to surveying school, it was, you put your head in the goggles and you have the two photos, you line up the nadir points, and hey, look, the trees come up out of it. Like, oh, that's neat. What this processing software is, at its most basic point, the different suites we use, it's the same thing. It's stereography, but it's digital stereography with, instead of having 30% overlap, you have upwards of 80 and 90% overlap. That's why I have this computer here, because a laptop can't process this data. Even my Microsoft Surface with an i7 processor can't look at some point clouds because it just crashes it, because it's so much data. So that's one thing that we found over the last few years. You have to have a hot rod computer to be able to process this data, because it's literally taking, like for this project that I'm going to show you guys, it was about 3,000 images, and they're 24 megapixel images, so they're of decent size, and it crunches them all together. It finds every tie point in them, and relates with the GPS from the drone, and then as opposed to ground control on the ground, and you develop what's basically a point cloud. If you guys are familiar with laser scanning technology, same thing, but it's all derived off of photos. So off of these point clouds, that's where we get all of our data derivatives, all of our elevation models, tin models, DEMs, contours, shape contours. Anything that you could get out of a point cloud from a scanner or a mobile scanner, we can derive from a drone from the air. So, like I said again, the possibilities sometimes are endless. We just did had a company approach us about inspecting a tower down west of Minneapolis. It was a 160-foot radio tower. We took one of our our rotorcraft drones, and we were able to fly it circular. A lot of overlap. We flew it circular, flew it across the top, and then we flew it up and down each side. We were able to process that data into a point cloud of this entire tower, vertical, put vector data to it and deliver basically an as-built model of this tower to our client, which in the past really hadn't been possible. You could try it with a reflectorless total station. You could try it with a laser scanner, but you get to that angle of incidence on the top 160 feet away, and it kind of gets skewed a little bit. They were able to find a broken beam inside of it off of our data, where that's what they were inspecting it for, and they were able to find it right near the top. It was kind of tilted just a few degrees out, and you could see the crack from our imagery in the beam. And that's like I said, the point clouds are what all of our data comes from. Now, depending on what height you fly from and what cameras and sensors you're using, our average ground sample distance, and ground sample distance is how far on the ground you have a usable data point. Now, most of the time we'll decimate those by far and away because it's just too much data. There's no reason in a GIS world to have a point every 2 inches on the ground. But the majority of our ground sample distance is around 3 to 4 centimeters on most of the flights we fly. So that's how we collect the data, because why not collect that much data when you're out there? And then in processing, we'll shrink the files down. Other sensors, NDVI, like we were talking about earlier, for agriculture, near infrared, it works very well for ag and forestry. FLIR is a cool one. Forward-looking infrared radar. We have a drone that has landing gear on it. When it takes off, it flies, and the landing gear comes up around, and it just has the camera there. So the camera is not inhibited by the landing gear or the propellers at all, and has a heat-sensing camera. So where we originally used it for was inspecting solar fields. When you inspect solar fields, you can fly over them with a heat-sensing camera, and as soon as you see a bad solar panel or a bad couple of photovoltaic cells, they turn out black. Boom, they stick out with the sore thumb. So you're able to send a crew, say, hey, the fourth one in on 10th row down, that one's bad, replace it. And it's helped, because otherwise before that, you had to go panel to panel and meter. Panel to panel and meter. Now what used to take a couple guys a few days to do, we could do in an hour. Fly. Another thing we've done with that camera is for some big commercial buildings, we've flown over the top of them and found where they're leaking heat and leaking air conditioning. We found like around the window seals and stuff like that, you can see cold air coming up. That's something that we're starting to work with the Energy Star of Wisconsin on. Search and rescue. There was a case in Hayward a couple months ago where there was an incident, and they flew over with a infrared seeking camera, and they were able to find where the people were around the house at night. So search and rescue, law enforcement. I know a friend of ours or a colleague of ours out in California, they fly for the National Forest Service for hotspots for fires. And they're flying a couple different kinds of drones. They're flying traditional imagery, and they're also flying some FLIR cameras to find hotspots, but they're flying traditional imagery to see where the fires have moved to, not have to put people on the ground. You can eliminate the having to put a smoke jumper in there and radio back, like, yeah, the fire's moving here. You just fly with a drone real quick, land it, process the data, and here's what we have. And if you guys are GIS professionals, you're familiar with LiDAR. LiDAR is another, they're starting to get smaller and smaller units. Traditionally in the past it was this big and mounted in a manned aircraft. Now they have little pucks that are the size of a coffee cup that you can mount on a drone that you can do LiDAR with. Some of those smaller ones aren't quite as accurate as the larger ones, but as advancements are being made, that's where they're going with this. I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples of some imagery and a couple point clouds. So this is a site we did up in northern Minnesota. So I'll show you this. This is going to load slow now. So the way the imagery, and the reason it's loading slow is that one at the bottom left is high resolution, and I'll show you that here in a second. This flight was done for a mine to see where their tailing ponds, an elevation model of where their tailing ponds have been filling up, where the water has been flowing, and what they need to do in the future as a design moving it. So right, I believe, Blake, right here was where you guys parked? Yep. So there's our two trucks. All you can see are the Trimble cases around it, the Trimble case in the back. So some of this imagery here, this is what the point cloud is derived of. This stuff is, it looks very good. You can map off this, but it's not as good as it could be. The more accurate stuff I have. Come on. Down here. So this is the same company, but this is one of their plants. Now we did some research on a project they were doing in Australia right now for another plant line like this, and they fly every Sunday to do inventory on every pile of dirt, every scoopful of rock that they've moved. They do inventory on just in its federally funded project with the Australian government. The reports that they're giving out, they're basically turning it into, in Australia, you're going to have to do this to get federal funds for projects. So I can keep going in here on some of this imagery. And so that's the resolution that we can grab. And this is what we're doing our mapping in the field up. You find fence posts, you find well caps. Instead of looking at imagery before and being able to pick out, say on a streets project, the manholes, some catch basins, stuff like that as a block. With this imagery, you're able to measure the manhole or the inlet protection or whatever very accurately. I think this right here is a 2-inch resolution. But so all of this data now can be crunched into a point cloud, and that will give you the data. And the thing about it is you never have to revisit that site. Say you missed something. Now you have it. You've captured the whole thing, whereas the traditional survey crew, you may have missed something, or you may have a blown HI or something you need to be able to check it. You don't have to revisit it. So going on from the imagery, so this looks like imagery 2, right? And this is a bit of a shrunk down file as well. But this is actually the point cloud. So every one of these points is an actionable data point. That gives you an X, Y, Z, just like you walked out there with a, I'll go over to where we can see some changes. Just like you walked out there with a survey pad and surveyed this whole thing. So that, now so where's the side? Either way. So this gets classified, the format is as a .las. It's a classified point cloud that gives you the X, Y, the Z, and the color of what it is. Now you can turn this black and white, you can change it, you can look at it by elevation. We take it from here. This is a software that's just I put it in this one because it's nice to look at. But it's traditional scanning data, but derived stereography from a drone. You don't have to, like there's on this site, there's a grader, really he's over here. He was out working, and it actually captured him as well. But in processing, you can take that out. You can dumb down the point cloud to not include those things. But that's one advantage of it as well. You don't have to shut him down from working. You can continue to work, you can continue to cruise right along. And we could be in and out of this site. I believe this site is about 850 acres. I think it took us about 2 hours to fly it. Less than 2 hours to fly it. And that's with setting control and all the above. And we were in and out of there. So So going to large sites, it's just a matter of how much data can you handle, because the drones can capture massive amounts of it. Is there anything else anybody wants to see here?
How do you set control? What do you use?
So we're setting control, most all of our control we're setting with RTK, VRS, we use Trimble R8s, R10s. So our photo control usually is, unless we're doing a permanent site, I know we do a couple ones where like, hey, we want you to refly this thing every month, so we'll go set permanent control, and we'll just, for that, it's rebar and caps, and then we paint them. We have a couple of targets that we have that are templates that we just paint aerial down, and they're about 4 inch by 4 inch and about this big X's. So it's like a traditional photo aerial target, but much smaller because we're dealing at a smaller scale and a little bit more accurate.
How many is that?
It depends on the site, and like this site here, I believe we set 5, 6.
I think it was yeah.
5 around the outside. We are actually looking at right now, there's a couple of companies out there that Trimble has a new unit called the UX5 HP. So the HP has a PPK GPS processing available in it. That being said, they're saying that you can get a like a VRS RTK quality coordinate in the rover while it's flying, and so you don't have to actually put ground control on. The reason that we opted for the HP itself when we originally bought it was the HP, the HP was coming out when we bought ours. But we got the UX5 as our first fixed wing drone because it gives those ground control reports. So when you process, it says, here's your ground control, here's the coordinates from your point cloud. How accurate are they? And they'll tie to within a couple hundreds. I mean, it's less than an inch on the ties X, Y, and Z, which is amazing. And that's what one of the reasons we do that is to show our clients how accurate it is. So if we didn't have those ground control reports, you don't have to believe me if I'm just like, yeah, it's great, it's spot on. But when I can show you, yeah, here's where we put the control with RTK GPS, and here's where our point cloud says it is, and there's a report associated with that, that helps us a lot, right? That helps us go into county governments, it helps us go into Shell Oil, who we're working with, saying, yes, this technology is viable. We've proven it, that it's viable. Now, we've done a couple of proof of concepts where we've gone out and taken traditional survey equipment, total stations, and surveyed along the top of dams. We did one where we did a dam project. We did a subdivision. We did a subdivision where we had to shoot some inlets and a couple of hydrant caps, stuff like that. And then we came through and surveyed it with our UX5, and I think one of them we surveyed with the DJI Phantom 4, and it tied to within an inch of our actual survey data. And for like talking about regressing a bit to frac sand mines, the amount of money that sits in those piles is substantial. You're off by a couple percentage points, and you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. When you can put a point on that pile every 4 inches, even with a dumbed down point cloud, every foot, every 2 feet, even with a shrunk point cloud, it's much more accurate than being out there shooting every 50 feet and doing a couple cross sections across the thing. Same thing with the landfills, being able to prove their slopes. One of the software that we use will develop a point cloud, and then we'll kick out cross sections of it, and the cross section, instead of having a shot every 50 feet, has a point every 2 inches going up to prove their slope to the NPCA or something like that. So as I go forward, the same thing. This is not just a gimmick. It's a viable technology that gets awesome results, and we can prove it. We have the point reports to prove it. One forward from here. I guess we're 220 already. My apologies. Safety first and foremost is this is really my last thing. The importance of following the FAA regulations. To not follow them gives a bad presence with the general public. Now, we have talked with people that say, oh, do you want to fly this project, do you want to fly that? I say, you know what? That's over like back when we had our Section 330, that's over a subdivision. We'd have to go and get permission from every person there. They're like, why don't you just fly it? Why don't you just go do it? Like, from a professional liability standpoint and a professional ethics standpoint, we won't do that unless, with some of the new regulations we were able to, but there's a lot of people out there, and especially for like real estate and stuff like that, taking videos and photos that they don't follow regulations, and it gives a bad taste in the public's mouth. You hear the stories like just over in South Carolina last week, there was a guy who took his 12 gauge out, shot someone's drone down over their property. That's illegal. It's and that person operating that, whether they follow regulation or not, if they did, they'd have some basis as to where they sit and why they did what they did. But skipping down here a little bit to law enforcement involvement,